Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths. In particular, Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother, Franklin. The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Hello and welcome to another episode of For Your Consideration, the podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm Mike Josic.
And I'm Dustin Friesenan.
Thanks for joining us. So welcome back to what we are calling the Fright Fest on FYC.
I was not consulted in this. I just want to make this clear and on the table.
Do you not like
first I've heard
Do you not
of it.
like Fright Fest?
Oh, it works for me. I'm just saying there's this being thrown around here.
Last week we talked about Friday the 13th, and despite what I originally thought, it didn't fare so well in the final analysis.
And this week we'll be looking at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and we'll see how that does.
So the first Texas Chainsaw came out in 1974. It was directed by Tobe Hooper and written by Kim Henkel and Tobe Hooper.
AKA that movie that makes you wonder just how many kills it actually takes in order to be qualified as a massacre.
Or if you prefer, Leatherface's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Because really that's what this film is about. Everybody is having a bad day. Every single person is not having the day they expected, including Leatherface. There's that great scene
where he accidentally gets himself with the chainsaw, which is what's going to happen. When you're running around with a chainsaw, it's actually a terrible weapon.
But even before that, I think it's after the second or maybe the third kill, and he's frantically running around the living room like, where are all these people coming from? There were no people here before, and now there's tons of people, and what am I going to do?
This is my house. What's going on here?
And
Who
he's
let them
like,
in?
he's killing them, and he's disposing of them, and hiding them, and he doesn't know what to do, and then he has that kind of moment where he's like, oh, dinner. Okay. We can handle this.
And as a crazy family, that all works for me. That all makes perfect sense. There's a lot of things in the movie that actually I really liked. For example, unlike a lot of slasher films, you don't have a whole lot of build up to a lot of these deaths. It's somebody's walking around and all of a sudden, bam, out comes Leatherface, crack you in the head with a hammer. You're done. You're down. Out. It felt a whole lot more natural, almost like they were setting these traps for people or just trying to take him down. Like, we're not fucking around here. We're not wasting time trying to set up these elaborate set pieces. It's just, oh, there's people here, kill, done. You're hunting, right?
And I think that's an interesting kind of way to look at that first half of the movie, which you had started talking about as being not having the slasher tropes and just being really efficient and strange and natural, well, as natural as being clubbed in the head with a hammer can be.
But here's the thing. One of the reasons it probably doesn't have the slasher tropes is this came out before Halloween. This is actually more of a predecessor to torture porn. Pretty much because of that last scene that goes on forever. For whatever reason, they decide, okay, we've got this chick here, and we're just going to tie her down to the chair and just be creepy around her for no real reason, and eventually kill her for dinner, maybe? They were going to feed her friends, but then they didn't. They were going to kill her. What are you even doing with her? You're just essentially psychologically torturing her for fun. At first, it's hunting, and you don't play with your food. You don't play with the animal. You don't shoot it in the leg for fun. You make a clean kill, and that's what Leatherface was doing. Now, all of a sudden, let's just keep this girl around because we got to pad out the next half hour of the movie. And that's kind of what it felt like to me. It made zero sense.
I do feel like it was two different movies, and I think the first half of that movie was very much about suspense, and it was psychological, and there were kind of horrific things happening that were making you feel uncomfortable, and you weren't sure what was going to happen next. Whereas the second half of the movie, which was that whole twisted dinner scene with the family, I feel as though Hooper was trying to show us Sally's slow descent into insanity while she's sitting there. I mean, just all those cuts to the face and the close-ups of the eyes. And she's really screaming for about the last 20 minutes of the movie nonstop. But narratively, you go from this psychological horror to this bizarre, surreal, black sitcom-y sort of situation.
It's almost like, well, if we're doing things efficiently and properly up front, how are we going to introduce the family? How is any of that going to make sense? Unless we just cut to the family and show what they're doing for half an hour, which would probably be rather awkward. So let's make an awkward dinner scene? It did not work for me at all, is what I'm getting at here.
I won't say that it didn't work for me, but I don't even really know what to think. Like, I can't say that it wasn't necessary because it does hold a place in the movie. It does move the plot forward, but it just does so in a very inefficient way, I think. And I really do think that the filmmakers were just kind of having fun with it. I've heard Tobe Hooper say that there's a lot of humor in the movie that people didn't really pick up on because of all the horror.
Honestly, like Leatherface running around, like, where are all these people coming from? What's going on here? It's like I got an infestation of rats all of a sudden. That was pretty funny, and that felt very natural, and I really enjoyed that. That was great. That was fantastic.
And Franklin was kind of comic with his whining and his...
I almost kind of wanted to backhand him a whole lot more.
I don't think anybody was sad when Franklin got the chainsaw in the gut.
By the way, in the original, at the very least, the only actual chainsaw kill, so I guess a massacre constitutes one kill now.
Well, he probably killed other people with chainsaws because they did that whole bit at the beginning where they're showing the pictures where they like unearthed all this other stuff.
But then, of course, the remake follows through a bit more with the torture porn in a lot more of the hostile kind of ways, where it's, here's somebody playing around with a gun, like pointing it in your face, forcing you to play Russian roulette in that whole scene in the car. There's a whole lot more unnecessarily violent sort of deaths, a lot more visceral stuff. And if there's one thing that kind of bugs me a little bit about the remake, which I did prefer because it lasts that whole scene at the end, you have that lesbian couple who gets the kid, right? And so now you've got them talking about Leatherface. Oh, that little boy, you know, everyone picked on him, but he's such a nice, sweet boy. What you set up is that Leatherface is killing whoever comes through town. Everyone in the town seems to know about it. He's giving you gifts, I guess, like, hey, here's a child for you since you're a lesbian couple and can't have one yourself. And I somehow doubt they're passing the vetting process for adoption. Who's picking on him? You're the town. You all say he's such a great kid. Who was picking on him? This was you. This is on you.
It's actually kind of similar to Friday the 13th, which perhaps isn't much of a coincidence since the same people who made Friday the 13th made this movie.
The remake, that is.
The remake.
Yeah.
Yes. Which, before we forget to mention it, was directed by Marcus Nispel, written by Scott Kozar, and released in 2003. I do think that there's a lot going on in Hooper's film that is worthwhile, and I do think that there's something very visceral, it's a movie that makes you prick up your ears. It's a movie that makes you pay attention. I don't know, I feel like I'm missing something about that last dinner scene. I
can't help but think of that dinner scene as anything but filler. Like, it doesn't fit the narrative structure. Like, in any sort of horror film of this type, you'll have a bunch of people killed off, and then the survivors sort of sneak around the killers. And that's how you'll sort of see what's going on. You have Wrong Turn. They'll find where the killers live. You have Friday the 13th. They'll find his house initially, and that's how you'll learn about the family and the killers and all that. Here, it's just, they were flat out kidnapped. It feels almost shoehorned in that she lives. Why did they keep her alive? No reason for it. In the remake, they got rid of that whole dinner scene, and instead you have people separated into sort of smaller groups, and there's a few more of them, so that you can see that, oh, the town's sort of in on it. You got the sheriff, he's extremely sketchy, and then he turns up to be a member of the family. You got the people who are captured by Leatherface. You have the girl who escapes to the lesbian couple's place and learns, oh crap, they've got the kid. Now I see how you get all these little pieces, and you piece them all together. And in that sense, I think it was actually put together a little bit better, even if the logic of a lot of things didn't quite make sense.
I agree that the family is better introduced in the remake because it starts very early on with the old guy in the wheelchair answering the door. I think the remake loses something with its choice of structure. or how it introduces those characters, you don't get the same sort of shock, I think. And like R. Lee Ermey, when he comes on screen, I think R. Lee Ermey does a really good job as the sheriff, but from the get-go, even if you've never seen the original, you know there's something wrong with this character.
Oh, absolutely. He is so over the top.
And when you're watching Hooper's version, and Sally comes like flying into the gas station, and there's that guy, he's like trying to help her, it very quickly goes south where he brings up the truck and comes walking in with a burlap sack and a rope. But you don't necessarily assume that he's going to be part of the problem.
Whereas the officer, yeah, he starts talking about groping dead girls and crap like that. It's like, okay, you are a psycho. Quite frankly, we would have been better off just dumping the body and getting the hell out of Dodge.
I do think that the remake is very much going for that visceral punch, and I don't necessarily think it's earning it the way that Hooper's version did. Hooper's version earned it because it's shot in a very naturalistic way. It's shot with very natural light.
Which unfortunately leads to a couple really dark scenes, like when Leatherface is chasing her through the woods. You can't see shit.
But the movie starts in daylight, and it feels like daylight, whereas Nispel's film, it starts in daylight, but it's all color timed, and it's all made to look
super dark.
It's dark,
gritty.
And it's got that sort of sepia tone to it, and it there's an artificiality to the remake, which is the same thing that I felt watching Friday the 13th last week, where it felt like these were actors who were remaking Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It didn't feel like a remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When you watch Hooper's version, the acting's not that great. Even the direction is not that great. There's some really nice shots in there, but not too much style in the not obvious, visible style in the filmmaking. And it's all stuff that works sort of subconsciously. It's all stuff that the angles that they choose, the fact that the actors were very kind of normal, natural people, the fact that even the house that Leatherface lived in was just a regular house. Whereas the house that they built, the set and the facade in the remake was like this plantation type.
Yeah, and there's a mill going on. But was that? I honestly don't know how many houses they were at in the remake. The structure felt it was all over the place, certainly by the end there, and you didn't know where you were. Honestly, I felt a bit like that in the first one sometime too, where okay, you've got the vacation house that they're going to. But then you've got their house. Which was which? Which one am I in at any given time?
Well, the one house that was Franklin's father's house that they were going to, or grandfather's house, it was clearly falling apart, and like at least Leatherface's had furniture and, you know, appeared lived in.
Didn't they both? Because, I mean, like Leatherface's had all sorts of rotten grime as well. It's not like it was super clean. Not even the butcher room was clean.
It wasn't super clean, but I mean the original house that they went to, that they were kind of walking through before the two characters went off to find the swimming hole and then encounter Leatherface because they hear the gasoline generator. That house was very clearly falling apart, at least to me.
I like how they were neighbors. Presumably they're neighbors. They're all around the same age.
They're walking distance, yeah.
They're walking distance. They had a swimming hole that was backyard adjacent, and they don't know about these guys at all. Presumably, Leatherface grew up around the same time as them. And they just don't know.
That's kind of like Friday the 13th, too, though.
Oh, yeah, especially the remake where it's like they run out of the camp, you're at Jason's place. You run into the camp, you're at Jason's place. Everyone around the lake is like, he just wants to be left alone. Everyone seems to know about him. I want to see a map of these places. Is it all taking place in one block? Like, it's ridiculous.
I do like the cast of the remake. I was happy seeing Eric Balfour. I was happy seeing Jessica Biel. I read an interesting review of the remake that said it's the story of a girl in a tank top desperately trying to keep it dry and failing. Which I can't help but agree with, because that was another thing. I mean, there was a sexuality to the original film that was kind of undeniable, but the way that they sort of play with it in the new film, it felt a little bit overt. It felt a little bit obvious.
One thing I did like about the acting in the remake, though, is even they felt fairly natural. Like, they experienced this suicide and everyone's freaking out. What do we do? And they're going over the options and people are getting angry one way or the other. And no matter what's happening, I actually feel that they were acted very well. The family, on the other hand, and the townspeople, they were a little too far out there, and it's these people sort of acting as the straight man to this murderous family, almost. It's almost like a really bad comedy routine.
I did like the fact, though, that in the Hooper version, I got the feeling that it was this one family, whereas when you watch the remake, you kind of get the feeling that they're in this, like,
community,
backwoods, apocalyptic, cannibalistic, backwards community.
Ever since the meat factory went down, we've just been taking whoever drives through town,
And I feel that it sort of feeds into the whole kind of hyperbolic nature of the remake. In a weird way, though, like, I remember when the new Spider-Man movies came out, The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, people were like, well, what did you think of that movie? And I thought, I liked a lot of it, but there were parts of the original Tobey Maguire movie that I liked more than the Andrew Garfield movie, and there was things about the Andrew Garfield movie that I liked more than the Tobey Maguire movie, and I kind of wish that I could take the two and mash them together. And I sort of feel the same way about these two films, because there's undeniably some amazing, fantastic filmmaking in the original Texas Chainsaw, but I think there's better narrative in the remake, but I like how the original doesn't go for the melodrama and the hyperbolic sense of threat and danger.
Like, one ridiculous thing that's hyperbolic in the second one, the first one, yeah, the family's crazy. They're all weird. But in the second one, everyone is just as weird as the family. They go into that pit stop, and you've got the meat, it's all covered in bugs. Like, every aspect of this town is just like the family.
It's like a Rob Zombie movie.
It's all way too far. And it's like, this wouldn't happen. Are you telling me how many people have gone missing in this town and nobody's come out here to do anything about it?
There were a lot of cars there.
Are there not any state patrol that are going through and being like, this is obviously 17 murder scenes rolled into one. Maybe we should check something out. Heck, the sheriff, he's probably gone into law enforcement officially somewhere within the state. He's not just wearing some random clothing. Is he? He could be. I don't know.
And for me, I think the bottom line is the first film actually achieves something. There's something very visceral, possibly profound. There's some social commentary in there. There's a weird... I've heard Hooper refer to the film as a story about family values. And I think also because it doesn't have those slasher film tropes, it doesn't have that formula, it's just insanity. The film, it breaks down into total insanity. Even the ending, like, what kind of an ending is it? It's...
She drives off, Leatherface is just freaking out with the chainsaw in the middle of the road, because that's what he's want to do, I guess.
I mean, clearly the police came back, because that's
how they find the thing.
That's how the film starts.
With the documentary.
With the John Larroquette. I love the fact that it's John Larroquette doing that voiceover. But the remake very much is going for...
They turned it into a weird circular thing, because you have that woman who committed suicide at the beginning freaking out about going back to the town, which she was walking towards herself, so she obviously got way the hell turned around. And it ends with the one survivor walking back towards town, getting picked up and driving back there, and everyone is freaking out again. And it seems weirdly circular that... So are you letting one person escape every time to get picked up by the next group of hitchhikers?
Well, no, she ends up stealing the police car, remember? She gets taken back to the gas station, but then she steals the police car.
And drives off and runs over the sheriff about 47 times. Which is what I would do. Like, screw that guy.
And then drives off. So, I mean, there's kind of the happy ending there, I suppose. She survives. And she takes the kid. You gotta save the kid.
Gotta save the kid.
But I did feel that Leatherface was too much like a Jason or a Michael Myers. I felt like the remake did go for those tropes, whereas the first film, I don't know. I think part of what I like about the first film is the fact that I just can't really pigeonhole it. It's not something that I can easily define.
If there's one thing I love about the Leatherface in the original, it's that stupid tie. That tie puts him together. I love that tie so much. It sells him for me entirely. Just another day at the office. I find like with most torture porn related things, it gets quite dull. Like there's not much that I care about going on in the movie. There's nothing to really hold on to. The deaths, they are usually too much. It's one of the reasons I enjoyed the beginning half of the first one. Because the deaths were nice and quick, nice and snappy, and you didn't have just this unnecessary gore like you're trying to pander to some sort of psychotic instinct in me. And I'm a bit of a sadist, so when I'm sitting here like, yeah, that's too much, I think you're doing it wrong.
I feel like we should summon the Pander Bear.
Whereas with the Friday the 13th kills, yeah, they're cheesy at the best. You might even laugh at them a little bit. Putting together these set pieces, is it better or worse? This is something that I gotta sort of ask myself now. Which one was, just comparing these two film franchises, which one is more amusing, more entertaining, more visceral to me? I don't think I've actually compared slasher to torture porn before.
Okay, I'm curious because it's really bugging me that I can't figure out this whole dinner scene, why it was there. So I'm going to pause the recording. I've got the audio commentary queued up. I'm going to see what the hell Tobe Hooper has to say about it, and then we're going to come back and possibly discuss. Alright, we're back from checking the commentary with Tobe Hooper, Gunnar Hansen, and Daniel Pearl. And while I can't say that we've gleaned any real pearls of wisdom from what we've listened to, I kind of got the sense that maybe this movie is about Leatherface. Maybe the movie's about Leatherface's really bad day. I was making a joke earlier when I said that this movie could be titled Leatherface and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. But really this movie starts with Leatherface having a bad day, and then you meet Leatherface's family, and then the girl gets away, and he's got to chase after her, and he cuts himself in the leg, and it ends on him doing that crazy chainsaw dance in the middle of the road. And it was a day that basically brought everything down, because that's when the police got informed, and that's when they came and they shut the place down, and presumably everybody got arrested or killed in a shootout or whatever happened. But Hooper, as I said earlier in the recording, Hooper did say that it was a film about family values.
Here's the thing, while we were listening to the commentary, I was also reading a little analysis of that as well, saying that it was an analysis of hypermasculine patriarchal sort of family values as well, because if you look at the family itself, there's no women in there. And you've got the dad whose sole purpose is getting that next meal. You've got the reverence of the grandpa who's completely impotent. He can't do shit all, despite the fact that he's the best killer there ever was, and completely fails at killing this tied-up woman with several hits, despite the fact that they said he can do it in one from like 100 yards away with a, I don't know, cardboard cutout of a hammer or whatever crap. And you look at Leatherface. During this scene, he's got an apron on. He's wearing a grandma wig. He's taking the place of the mother, almost to an extent.
He's got a new face on from earlier in the film. It's got different hair, and he's got the lipstick on it.
So this is somebody who's not only having a bad day, he's got no feminine influence in his life, and he's pretty much reacting in some sort of weird, demented way, that's for sure. He's housekeeping, trying to make sure... He's getting shouted at for, oh, look at what your brother did to the door, sort of deal later on when the cook comes in.
One of the best lines in the film, really.
Like, he's just getting non-stop crap, and all he wants to do is keep house, almost.
And maybe they kept Sally alive. Maybe they brought Sally to the table because they've already killed like 3 or 4 other people. They don't need any food, but maybe, like you said, it's a very hyper-masculine environment. Maybe they wanted a woman. It may have been something a lot darker than that. They may have wanted an after-dinner surprise, but...
I actually don't feel it was like that. If anything, the person doing all the killing is Leatherface. If anything, he would have been the one keeping her alive to an extent. And it might just be so that he had someone to gab with.
They might have wanted to just keep her as a female presence. The fact that she was screaming and losing her shit through the entire thing, I think that's where they finally decide, okay, this isn't working out. Let's just take care of her. And then the hitchhiker guy, Leatherface's brother, is the one who decides, oh, let's let Grandpa do it. And then it goes through that, and that's how she gets away.
And once again, it's up to Leatherface to fix this problem. But even that, it feels like we're grasping at straws here. That dinner scene just...
I will agree that the dinner scene goes on a little long. Like I said, I do think it is trying to spotlight somebody going completely insane.
Honestly, a number of scenes go on a little long. The chase scene lasts how many minutes? As they're just running through the Black Forest? It gives an impression of how long that he's chasing her, but at the same time, a lot of things wandering around certain places feels like they're just sort of stretching it out a little bit.
I think that's probably valid, and it's not even an extremely long movie. Like, I only think it's 83 or 87 minutes long.
But other than the dinner scene and the scene at the beginning in the car with the brother, the hitchhiker brother, everything happens really fast, which, once again, is the stuff that I like, because that feels a lot more natural.
But Hooper could be playing with pacing. He could be playing with your expectations.
Or is that us adding on more intelligence to something that was an independent film done by a college student?
It could be. Or you could just say, I don't know what it means, so it must be art. So we've talked about both films. Let's bring it to the final analysis. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003. Where do they fall for you, Dustin?
They fall very middle of the road for me. Like, it's not something that I really intend on revisiting at all. I'm not a torture porn fan myself, and I'm going to keep calling it that until it sticks. It wasn't really that scary to me. I can see how Tobe Hooper was saying that there's the comedy in the first one. The remake, it was just visceral. It's just, here's creepy stuff happening, and it was way too over the top. There was no real subtlety going on. There's some neat stuff if you think about how the town must operate, but beyond that, I wouldn't really... it's not movies I would recommend to anyone, really. The first one, yes, because I do enjoy some of the pacing at the beginning, but I'd certainly warn them that the scene at the house goes on really unnecessarily long. It's not something that I'd see for either scares or for real analysis otherwise.
I think I will probably revisit the original Texas Chainsaw.
That dinner scene is just bugging the crap out of you, ain't it?
No, it's not even so much the dinner scene. It's one of those things where I'm sure I'm going to cross paths with it again. I do like Hooper as a filmmaker. It is a seminal work in cinema and in horror. I think it's highly likely that I will watch it again at some point in the future. Not so sure with the remake.
You're not really going to get anything additional from the remake. It's got no depth to it. There's no underlying meaning. Like, Tobe Hooper will say that the first one is about family values and structures like that. I highly doubt anyone who wrote anything for the remake is going to give you some sort of deep philosophical meaning for the film in any way, shape, or form.
I do think they are both fairly middle of the road. I think the original has more going for it than the remake. I do stand by what I said, where there are things about the remake that I like that I wish were in the original, and there are things about the original that I like that I wish were in the remake. But whereas we both kind of shit on the Friday the 13th movies, I feel that these aren't terrible, but they're also not great.
I'd much rather watch the remake of the Friday the 13th than either of these two again.
See, I would probably go back to the original Texas Chainsaw than either the Friday the 13th that we watched or the remake of Texas Chainsaw. I do feel like there's something going on in that film. I do feel like there's something happening there, and it makes me feel... It's provocative. Actually, I think that's the word that I've been seeking this entire recording. It's a provocative film.
It is the only one that provokes. I will give it that. It is the only one that I feel gets any sort of additional thought.
And I do feel that the remake is going through the motions, and it's taking the surface elements of the original and going, oh yeah, that was scary. There was an interview where Gunnar Hansen, who played Leatherface in the original film, was relating how one of the casting people from the remake had called him and asked him if he wanted to have some sort of part in the remake. They told him that they weren't going to go for like the big gory bloodbath that the original was. They wanted to go psychological thriller. And he was like, have you guys even seen the movie? Because when you watch Texas Chainsaw from 74, there's very little blood. The blood is on the walls. It's stains. It's not gushing. It's not flowing. It's not sort of in the moment.
Deaths are not close up. A lot of stuff is like hammer to the head and then it's sort of just quick and over. It's not these long drawn out things.
It's a very personal film, but it also has very impersonal things to it. And I think it keeps you off balance. And I don't think the remake does that. I think the remake is a bloodbath. I think it goes for very traditional storytelling. It goes for very traditional horror. I think it's more slasher than torture porn, but ultimately I think it fails. So, in the final analysis for me, Texas Chainsaw 1974, okay, pretty decent. Texas Chainsaw 2003, meh.
And that's really all there is to say about it. It is pretty forgettable. So forgettable that I've already mixed it up with any other Texas Chainsaw that I've seen.
I have to say, I'm a little disappointed. Kind of set out on this whole October Fright Fest thing, thinking, oh man, we're going to watch all these classic horror movies. We've got like 2 classics and 2 remakes in the bag, and so far very underwhelming.
Now, to be fair, we kind of went with the underwhelming ones first. The next batch, I already have stuff to say about. I know what they are. You probably don't.
Well, the next batch is going to include some of my favorites, both in original and remake categories. And next week, we are going to be doing which movies, Dustin?
Nightmare on Elm Street.
So, Nightmare on Elm Street by Wes Craven and Nightmare on Elm Street by Samuel Baer.
The really reviled remake.
Also produced by Michael Bay. I didn't realize that one was also produced by Michael Bay.
3 of the ones we are doing are Michael Bay flicks.
What is it with this guy? So be sure to tune in next week if you want to hear our commentary on that. And if you want to give us comments on our commentary for these films, feel free to check us out on Facebook, on Twitter. We are at FYC Show. We're on Instagram. You can also find us on Stitcher and iHeartRadio. We're all over the internet. Tell your friends. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Spread the word if you like the show.
And that'll keep us in business and in long underwear for the cold upcoming Canadian winter months.
We did get our first snow.
And it's actually stuck around for more than a day.
We're not quite in a Roland Emmerich movie here, but we'll keep you posted. And with that, we bring this episode of FYC to a close.
Hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, I'm Dustin.
And I'm Mike.
Ta-ta.
See you next time.
Color of their hair, not the reason that I stare, but I always was a fool for a blind. Ba boo da, boo ba da,
Look,